Let me begin by saying hello to you all and welcome to this UNEA6 online side event, both to those joining from Nairobi and those joining from elsewhere in the world. My name is Francine Pickup and I'm the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Policy and Programme Support at the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today at this event. A reminder that live interpretation is available in French, Spanish, and Russian. You can access it by clicking on the interpretation button located at the bottom of the Zoom screen and selecting the appropriate channel. This session today addresses a very important issue, an issue that hasn't really been discussed enough or examined enough, which is the link between nature, sustainable development, and subsidies. We will hear from an esteemed panel today, highlighting country experiences as well as the global experience on redesigning subsidies for sustainable development. I'm very pleased to introduce to you now the panel. We have Haoliang, who is Under-Secretary General and Associate Administrator of UNDP. We have Rebecca Powell, who is Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Nature in the United Kingdom. We have Maria Teresa Becerra, Chief of International Relations in the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia. And we have David Laborde, Director of the Agrifood, Economics and Policy Division at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Welcome all, and thank you so much for joining us today. Let me begin by turning first to UNDP Associate Administrator, Mr. Haoliang to kindly deliver your opening remarks. Over to you, Haoliang.
Thank you very much, Francine. Thank you very much, Minister Paul, Maria Teresa, and David for joining this important discussion. Dear colleagues, participants, it is my pleasure to help frame our discussion today on subsidies and sustainable development. The life and the livelihoods of billions of people, as well as our economies, depend on biodiversity and ecosystems. This includes informal and formal work on food and agriculture, commodities, and fisheries. Fisheries and agricultural production are worth over $400 billion, and about 600 million people and their livelihoods depend at least partially on the sector. Yet over 50% of the support provided in emerging economies for fisheries in recent years came from policies with high risk of encouraging unsustainable fishing. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework includes new financial targets to respond to these risks. For example, Target 18 calls on us to reduce harmful incentives and scale up positive incentives for biodiversity. While it is clear we need to increase finance to preserve nature, we also need to look at decreasing the negative finance flows that go against our efforts to finance nature. The OECD has estimated that we spend approximately $500 billion a year in subsidies that are considered potentially harmful to nature. This far exceeds the global estimated public investments in nature of $150 billion a year. This financial gap and the negative investments result in habitat destruction, land degradation, biodiversity loss, great emissions and pollution, and the growing impacts on communities and economies. Also, according to OECD, across 54 economies, $345 billion a year in agricultural support was provided in ways that undermine the sector's sustainability. At the same time, harmful agricultural subsidies are responsible for the loss of 2.2 million hectares of forest per year, equivalent to 14% of global deforestation, based on a World Bank study. It is time to ensure that economic incentives help reverse and not exacerbate the planetary crisis while generating sustainable jobs and livelihoods for communities. Agriculture, for example, has a critical role to play in ending poverty, eradicating hunger, achieving food security and gender equality, and reducing inequalities. Small farms are often more productive per hectare than large farms, better for improving economic growth and better for conservation. Engaging these actors in agricultural policies is critical if the shift to more sustainable food systems is to be successful. Repurposing agricultural subsidies by including biodiversity criteria and green agricultural practices in subsidy requirements will allow governments to optimize scarce public resources and support more efficient food systems in ways that better benefit small farmers. UNDP recently launched our Nature Pledge, a strategy to accelerate and scale up support to over 140 countries to reach their ambitions under the Global Biodiversity Framework, including Target 18. In line with the Nature Pledge and through our Biodiversity Finance Initiative, the BIOFIN, UNDP has helped step-by-step guides for governments and to make subsidies more responsible and nature positive. With these step-by-step guidelines, countries can scan their subsidies to determine how they are harmful and to redesign them, informed by an analysis of complex social, gender, environment, economic and political economy concerns, paving the way for an inclusive, just transition. To accelerate progress, UNDP is also assessing the harmful impacts of subsidies in 27 countries. Several of them, such as Colombia, have already mapped and identified what subsidies can be redesigned. This represents critical progress towards Target 18 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We cannot achieve these results alone. Partnership is critical. To achieve this partnership, first, we need partnerships within and across national governments. We need to support countries who are ready to lead by examples and commit to redesigning harmful subsidies and to sharing their experience through South-South cooperation. Second, we need to provide financial support to countries putting this issue on their agenda. The UK, Germany, and the GEF are already leading the way. Third, we must join forces as international agencies. UNDP is working closely with FAO, UNEP, and OECD, and others to help countries assess existing subsidies and to prioritize options for repurposing. Ladies and gentlemen, reducing harmful incentives totaling 500 billion a year and scaling up positive incentives for biodiversity is not just a mere policy option for us to consider. Repurposing such subsidies is essential if we are to accelerate progress on Agenda 2030 and achieve the goals of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Paris Agreement. Let us respond to this challenge and work together to create a global movement to take this agenda forward for people and the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Haoliang, for those inspiring words and setting the framework for today's discussion. It's clear that repurposing subsidies is really critical if we're going to achieve the SDGs and ensure a sustainable future for all. So now let's move on to the panel and start this discussion. And first, let me turn to Minister Pao. United Kingdom Minister is a strong supporter of UNDP's Biodiversity Finance Initiative. And I'd particularly like to highlight your support that you're providing for the work on subsidies as an important priority under the 10-point plan for financing biodiversity. But the UK has a lot of experience to share from its own domestic work in this area. The UK has been promoting multiple solutions to incentivize nature positive activities. UK introduced the biodiversity net gain, long-term nature targets, and also reformed agricultural subsidies. So what can you tell us from the experience of UK's work in greening finance flows to decreasing negative impacts and enhancing positive investments? Over to you, Minister.
Thank you so much, Francine. And first of all, of course, I must just thank everyone at the UN Development Programme for hosting us as part of this launch and for inviting the UK to participate. We're always very pleased to share our experience, but also to work globally with our partners. And we're very, very proud to support BIOFIN and this ongoing work on the global transition to nature positive outcomes through the creation of biodiversity finance plans. And I think the scene was very ably set just there, wasn't it, by Mr. Xu. So I also wanted to say that last year I was very fortunate to travel to Costa Rica, and I did actually see some of BIOFIN's work in action. And when you see it really happening, what we're trying to do to transition the subsidies, on the ground to give people a living as well and support nature, it was really informative. And I'm sorry Carlos Manuel is not with us on this call, but I know he also has done huge work in this particular area. And so I want to congratulate BIOFIN on their new Global Environment Facility, GEF8, the umbrella programme, which is actually, I believe, signed up 91 new countries already to start their biodiversity finance plans this very year. And I think that brings the total of countries completing biodiversity finance plans to an absolutely incredible 132. So that really is a really big step to getting the transformation for financing biodiversity globally. And the guidebook has been referred to, and that's what we're actually launching today, which I believe will be a really useful tool in helping us to reach our shared biodiversity goals. Because subsidy reform has actually been a very notoriously tricky thing to address. But with this step-by-step guide, governments will now see a clear way through. So please, I would just urge everyone to use it. And now to the question that you were referring to, Francine. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we're doing at home. I'm a great believer that it's no good lecturing people about what they should do if we're not doing it at home. So in England, we're actually delivering the biggest changes to farming policy in a generation, and that's through our agricultural transition, because we definitely believe that farming and nature can, but absolutely must go hand in hand. And our farming reforms are repurposing area-based subsidies and replacing them. So that was getting some money just for having some land, whereas we're replacing it with what we call our environmental land management schemes, which pay farmers to deliver some positive actions for the environment. So they've got to do something for the money in terms of climate, biodiversity, but also it has to be alongside sustainable food production, and we all know how important that is. And we've started funding already, and projects are already underway, and we are also working really hand in hand to deliver large-scale changes to the landscape over the next 25 and 30 years. So we're looking a long way ahead with a lot of our projects. And by 2028, English farmers will be running sustainable businesses which deliver also profitable food production and recover nature. So alongside this, you mentioned, Francine, it was actually 2 weeks ago today that I was very proud to launch our biodiversity net gain system into our planning system. That was something actually that was introduced in our Environment Act, which I was also extremely proud to steer through Parliament. This biodiversity net gain means that all new housing developments in England are required to deliver at least 10% benefit for nature. So 10% more nature than was there when they started the development. And it actually makes England the first country in the world to make biodiversity net gain a legal requirement. And this is going to be a really important tool in our drive to reverse to the decline in nature. So it's one of a range of measures, but it's a very important measure. And also it will help with our goal for everyone in England to live within 15 minutes walk of a green space or a blue space, meaning obviously water. And so this is actually going to transform how our developments work together for people and nature. And then last year, we also published our revised environmental improvement plan. Again, that was something triggered through our Environment Act. And that sets out our comprehensive approach to deliver environmental improvements in England. It sets out our legally binding long-term targets to tackle some of the biggest pressures facing our environment. And these targets will ensure progress on clean air, clean and plentiful water, tackling waste, and more sustainable use of our resources. So it will also deliver a step change in tree planting with targets and a better marine environment and a more diverse, resilient and healthy natural environment. So basically, what I'm trying to explain is we've set a framework, we've set a legal framework, and within those parameters, we hope to deliver these improvements for the environment. But shifting financial flows, of course, requires not just the reforming of our subsidies at home. And so an important step that we've also introduced is called due diligence, which means issues in one country aren't just shifted to another country. So we're also introducing new legislation, which is aimed at helping ensure that the products that we buy don't harm the world's forests, which, as we all know, are very much the lungs of the earth. And so this will see businesses that have a global annual turnover of over £50 million banned from using those products if they are sourced from land that has been illegally used in those countries. So businesses over 500 tonnes or more of each regulated commodity a year will also be required to undertake due diligence on their supply chains and to report on this exercise annually for transparency, so we can actually see what's happening. So that we hope that all of these actions cumulatively, both at home and globally, will help the UK support our clear mission to make this the decade where we put nature on a road to recovery. I can't say it's easy. I think you said that, Francine. These things are very tricky, but we have the framework, and that is the direction of travel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, and it's really inspiring to hear the level of ambition and the different measures that you've put in place domestically, but also globally, to really try and turn around, as you say, very difficult and it takes a long time, but the measures that you described are very, very comprehensive. So thank you for sharing that UK example. I'm now going to move on to our next panelist from Colombia, which is an important global leader for sustainable development. So Maria Teresa, Colombia will be hosting COP16 in a few months as a major leader for biodiversity conservation in Latin America and the Caribbean, with the finance and subsidies agenda as a priority. Could you share how Colombia has advanced the work on Target 18 on harmful subsidies And how will this work support and articulate the Ministry's efforts with other sectors on reducing harmful incentives and increasing positive incentives for biodiversity? Over to you, Maria Teresa.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon to the people that are in this webinar. Thank you very much, Francine, for having me in this event, and also thank you to the other panelists for sharing your experiences and views on this important topic. Indeed, regarding the COP16, Colombia is making progress in supporting and updating the National Biodiversity Action Plan, and this process involves also the analysis of financial mechanisms and also the role of incentives in the biodiversity loss drivers in Colombia. So Colombia, as a signatory country of the Convention of Biological Diversity, is committed to generating strategies to stop the drivers of biodiversity loss. Since 2010, with the Aichi targets, we have included these frameworks in guiding our work for eliminating or reforming incentives that are harmful to biological diversity. So now that we have the new global biodiversity framework, we are working in our strategy and also involving activities to progressively eliminate or reform subsidies that harm biodiversity by 2030. As it is in Colombia, the study of these harmful subsidies is being accompanied in several countries by the UNDP-BIOFIN initiative, specifically with the support of BIOFIN. In Colombia, we have been able to analyze the role of these incentives, and it's taking into account that incentives and subsidies of the agriculture sector have been they have a strong potential on affecting biodiversity. So with the support of BIOFIN that started in 2020, we had a diagnosis and evaluation phase that allows us to understand the potential impacts of these subsidies on biodiversity, so that with BIOFIN in the country, we developed an inventory of 42 instruments of the agriculture sector. And as a result, the study identified that 12 of these instruments have some relation with the biodiversity loss drivers. In the case of the agriculture sector of Colombia, these drivers are related to, firstly, the expansion of the agricultural frontier in natural ecosystems that has caused land use changes and also deforestation in some areas of Colombia. On the other hand, the study identified that the use of synthetic agrochemical has also a potential driver of biodiversity loss due to the degradation of soils, degradation of waters, the atmosphere, and also the impact of genetic uniformity and land degradation. Also, in addition, policy, financial marketing and market access, science and technology, and territorial planning instruments were involved in the study. So with the support of the BIOFIN, during the second phase of this study, we have results on the analysis of the incidence of this kind of incentives in the agriculture sector and the impact on ecosystem services in one specific region of Colombia, that is La Mojana. La Mojana is an area, one of the biggest wetlands in Colombia. It is about 1 million hectares, and it has been classified as an area of importance for Latin America and the Caribbean due to the large number of aquatic, territorial, and transitional habitats that are included in this biological corridor that connects also protected areas and other natural regions of Colombia. So based on the study also, the government of national also identified the priority or the need to work together involving private sector in eliminating and modifying subsidies against management of biodiversity and climate change adaptation. So this priority is already included in our National Development Plan, and also, as I said before, it is being addressed in the process of updating our National Biodiversity Plan. So the study of these incentives of the agriculture sector and the impacts on biodiversity in Colombia has been an excellent starting point to deep in the evaluation of the impacts of this kind of incentives in other sectors, for example, the fossil fuels. And also we have included the analysis of these incentives in other agriculture subsectors like forestry, fishing, and aquaculture that is being also developed with the support of the German cooperation. So based on these studies, we have been able also to identify the importance or address the impact of those subsidies on biodiversity, and also involve more actively private sector in the implementation of good practices, and also in the identification of how the financial mechanisms also can help to promote that those sectors involve good practices, and even if we use similar mechanisms. So from the intersectoral and interinstitutional work that has been carried out, we identified that there are two financial instruments that could be changed, adjusted to have a better impact on biodiversity. So the idea is that we also use the financial mechanism, but we change the effect on biodiversity. So these instruments that we have already identified include the special lines of credit. So it is an instrument that we have that the Ministry of Agriculture and FINAGRO have been running now for several years. The idea is that with this instrument, we can support the competitiveness of the agricultural sector, and normally is focused on strengthening the agricultural production chains, and normally this money is invested more in production systems, for example, mechanized production systems like rice, corn, cattle, and also other activities that could have an impact on biodiversity. So the idea is that we are able to change the impact. We could use the same instruments to promote that these agriculture sectors implement biodiversity-friendly practices, and they are also able to transform the production systems into more sustainable systems, indeed. So based on this experience, also we have identified other instruments that are being prioritized so that we can reform to be sure that they are more biodiversity friendly, let's say. So it is one of these instruments are the national policy of the competitiveness national policy for the Colombian dairy sector. So we have here the opportunity to involve cattle ranching producer farmers in the implementation of good practices, so that we have a more sustainable dairy, and also it could have a big impact on our GDP. Also, we have identified that there is a process of the marking specific communal beaches, and also the government has mechanisms to title areas that are from the natural reserves. That not protected area is like we have like a land reservation, and the government has been titling those lands to the people that actually have been victims or some of conflicts, or maybe in the past that with the previous agrarian reform. So the idea is that we can use also these instruments to involve people in implementing sustainable practices, and maybe that we also use the issue of land titling as a way to commit people in the implementation of good practices, and even though also the reduction of deforestation in Colombia. So the results obtained in this national study of perverse instruments in the agricultural sector have allowed us to corroborate that agricultural policy instruments have the potential to generate damage to biodiversity, but also that instruments can be reformulated to have a positive impact on biodiversity. So if we are able to involve small and medium-sized producers, and also to have programs to strengthen the production chains, the value chains, we would be able to design different mechanisms that have a more positive impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria Teresa. Colombia is really playing a leading role, both in terms of its hosting of the upcoming COP, but also clearly in the way you are repurposing existing subsidies to benefit biodiversity. So great to hear those examples of how you're leading by example. Now, moving to our next panelist, as Haoliang mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the subsidies that we're talking about here are in the agriculture and fisheries sectors. Therefore, it's with great interest that I'm going to ask the next question to our speaker from the Food and Agriculture Organization. So, David, the FAO has always been a center for knowledge on agriculture and fisheries. We also saw recently in the news how repurposing subsidies can have detrimental social impact that also needs to be mitigated in order for the repurposing to be successful. So how is FAO approaching the GBF target 18, and which tools are you using to help countries such as Colombia or the UK to meet their target?
Thank you, Francine, for this great question, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. I think the previous speakers have already illustrated a number of key aspects. So that's true that in agriculture and in fisheries, we have a lot of public actions, in many cases in form of subsidies, that have addressed sometimes the concern of the past, but today are lagging behind in terms of integrated vision and really trying to deliver for the society what taxpayer would like to see happening. Now, the first task that we do at FAO is actually to monitoring and documenting these subsidies, but also opening a bit the black box that we have around this notion, because we have a lot of public action, a lot of support, but every type of support is not what we traditionally call subsidies, meaning taxpayer money spent on a good or services. But it's important to understand the whole spectrum of activity that government have in terms of price support, trade policies, that will also change incentives incentive for farmers, incentive for fishermen, incentive for investors, incentive for consumers. And here we really, at FAO, deal with a large number of members. So you have some members that have a very good understanding of where the money is spent. And sometimes you also need to look in different ministers because you have a set of programs that can impact your agri-food system in different ways. But we have also members that still lack institutional capacity to really see where the money is spent, or sometimes also between the programmation and the scheduling of expenditure and the execution, there are gaps. So that's why we have this monitoring activity that is important. And we have a particular program called MAFAB that is doing this with some countries for more than 15 years and strengthen their capacity really to track the impact of their policies, including on their spendings, because we cannot reform what we don't really know. So that's where I think it's very important. And even, you know, when we say, okay, today, how much money is spent on agriculture, we have a ballpark number, you know. For fisheries, we have more question marks. And obviously, we have also a number of shadow areas where we do tax exemption, for instance. And we see it all around the world. In many cases, farmers will not pay the taxes on fuel like other sectors. So here it's hidden subsidies to some extent. It's not money that is not given by the government, but not collected by the government. But that's part, you know, of this package. So really this classification, this transparency for us is the starting point. And depending with which country we work, we operate at different levels. And then we engage in this dialogue of reform and repurposing. That clearly is not for us to come and lecture countries, but to make sure that they align what they want with what they do. And that's an important part of this dialogue, because sometimes we have also legacies of old policies, as I've said, that we are trying to achieve all questions. And we know it's very difficult to sometimes update or reform policies. So the statu quo prevails when the challenge are different. And obviously, with target 18 today, we have a clear international target. But at the domestic level also, you will have many countries that try to acknowledge this. So really understanding the priorities and making sure that the money that is spent by government will achieve these goals. And we also here using a modeling technique, we try to see how we can optimize their policies. And we do it at the country level. We do it in many African countries, but we also have partnership with other countries on basically all continents. But there's also something that is very important for us is the overall consistency of this reform. Because a lot of the products that are supported today are also traded. And we also have a strong trade agenda. We have also the WTO discipline on policies and subsidies. And so we need consistency. Sometimes it's also brought as a roadblock on the reform. You know, people say, oh, if the other farmers benefit from this type of support, it's unfair, so we cannot do the reform at all. But also, if today we implement some policies that can actually solve some problem at home, but then outsource the problem to your neighbor, then we have to do this. So it's important for us always to move from a country level agenda driven by country objectives up to regional and global consistency. But the most challenging part in what we do is also to acknowledge that we have to deal with a number of trade-offs and synergies. Because it's not like if governments want to achieve one target. Yes, we want to preserve biodiversity. Yes, we want to reduce emission, but countries have also a target in terms of food security, in terms of inclusiveness for their farmers, in some cases in terms of regional development, and that can be pretty important also when you are in federal states, because it's true that some country or some regions, or would like to expand their activities, especially if they are impoverished region. And that's where bringing evidence is important. It's not like if we want to hide the fact that there are trade-offs. We want to make them clear in order to be also able to show the type of policy package you need to articulate your response. Just moving money around may not actually achieve what you want. Sometimes you will need additional regulation or package to get the outcome. And when we touch this question of biodiversity, I think it's very important in the sense that biodiversity is a pretty complex issue that occur at different scale, from the biodiversity in soil in terms of the life of the soil and microorganism to big land use aspect. And some policies can actually fix a problem, but create another one. Typically, we know that if you reduce the amount of pesticides, you can locally improve your biodiversity. But if it is associated with lower yields, but then you may start to import more, or you start to displace your production. You can start to lead to more land use change somewhere else. And that's not, increasing the biodiversity in one place, but reducing it in another place is not good for the world, Carbon can add up. Biodiversity doesn't really add up. So that's what we really want to make it clear, to understand this mechanism and to say, okay, if you want to reduce the use of pesticide, you still need to innovate and find other technology to avoid loss of productivity, because loss of productivity will still mean or loss of income for some farmers, but also may displace the production somewhere else. Or you need to adjust on the consumption side. And that's where, for example, changing diets and actually subsidies for the consumers for getting better balanced diets, better nutrition education, can be also part of that. So the policy space of repurposing can go beyond the traditional border. And actually, sometimes it's also a good opportunity to say, we need to invest more in our agri-food system. Yes, we want to better use the money we have, but in a world where we ask our agri-food system to do more and more, we can also make a case for more investment in these sectors, but obviously showing that we already use the money we have in a better way is a very good selling argument to ask more. If we misuse resource today, Ministry of Finance are not going to say, yes, we are going to give you more money to continue creating problems. When actually you show that you are part of the solution, it helps. So that you see is a type of dialogue, but what is very important for us is having good data on policies. So this monitoring and this transparency is important. And then using analytical tools to be able to guide and inform countries in this repurposing agenda, but showing that how biodiversity, climate action, and social action are interconnected in a way that at the end can be consistent, but it has to be proactive, and it's not just by looking at only one issue that we will get the overall consistency. And that's also in this period that during the last climate COP, we introduced a roadmap to achieve SDG 2 and under the Paris Agreement, but where actually biodiversity and land use play a very important role. We need to stop thinking in silos and to start being integrated to deliver on this multiple agenda. Thank you.
Super. Thanks a lot, David. And thank you for really talking about the complexity of the sort of issue and the need to expand the policy dialogue at the national and global levels, and bringing in multiple stakeholders, both on the production and the consumption side. Really useful. So it's been a really interesting discussion thus far, and I just want to go back to the panelists with one final question to you all. which would be if you would have to give one piece of advice to heads of government around the world at UNEA to help them repurpose their harmful subsidies towards a more sustainable future, what would that advice be? So let me start, Minister Power, with you. What would you like to share with fellow governments based on your experience in the UK?
Okay, well, thank you. Good question. And of course, there's not just one answer. But first of all, you would expect me to say use the guidebook. And we're very happy, obviously, to be supporting the creation of this guidebook. And BIOFIN have laid out a clear roadmap for countries to reform their subsidies, specially tailored to achieve the Global Biodiversity Framework Target 18. Including that crucial step of carrying out a scan of the full subsidies systems in their countries. I was actually very interested to hear from our friend in Colombia, Teresa Becerra, about they're doing exactly that, aren't they, in Colombia, and how they're then thinking of tailoring their financial instruments, to check, to direct different outcomes. And so all governments, I would say, should take this opportunity to use public money to bolster public goods rather than to undermine them. But we know this is very challenging, and it does require changes to the structure and the processes that people and their livelihoods rely on. And so I would add that it is critical that when carrying out these forms that they are co-designed with the people involved, so that we can bring the people with us along this journey. And for us, this has meant co-designing our environmental land management schemes that I mentioned earlier with our farmers and with our land managers. We've done an awful lot of pilot projects to learn how we could actually achieve the outcomes that we wanted, and working with them on the reforms so that the subsidies support both nature and people equally. I was interested to hear what David Laborde said about the pesticides. It was a very good point. So one of our measures in our environmental land management scheme is what we call integrated pest management, to reduce the use of pesticides and use green measures and other measures so that we don't have to use so many pesticides. But as you said, David, we don't just want to export the problems somewhere else and then reduce our food production and import food from places where they do use lots of those pesticides. So what we've also done is increased our grants for productivity and technology and innovation, exactly as you were intimating, so that we can still keep our food production up and our food security, but we can have this more positive outcome for nature. So just to wind up, what we're talking about really, isn't it, is a really substantial change to the way of thinking, thinking up new and different incentives, as outlined in the guidebook. But it is possible. What I want to say, it is possible. We're demonstrating that in England. We started on that journey, but there's no getting around it that, whichever way we go about this, the underlying message is that we do urgently need to change how government spends taxpayers' money to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars every single year. But hopefully the guidebook will help.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister. So, Maria Teresa, what advice would you like to give from Colombia to other governments on this issue?
Okay, thank you, Francine. I think that the main lesson learned is that we have to work more cross-sectoral, and as maybe sometimes it is, the environmental issues are more from the competence of the ministers of environment. It is very important that we get more involved, the Ministry of Agriculture and also other sectors, as well as the private sector itself and the farmers and the local communities. So our experience shows that the implementation of a reform of these mechanisms or subsidies require the co-responsibility of all economic sectors. So we as ministers of environment, we can be the facilitator of the process, but really we need the commitment from other sectors that are the ones that are invited to take action on these issues. So, for example, in the case of Colombia, the work of FINAGRO and BIOFIN have identified the importance of promoting new financial mechanisms, as I said before, or reform the existing financial mechanisms, but it is something that has to be done involving producers, farmers associations, research institutes, agriculture sector entities, environmental sector entities, so that we can identify what are the best route and also the mechanisms that could help us to deliver better results. So in this sense, what we have identified that it is needed that we have a deep approach to understand, to evaluate more comprehensively the impact of those incentives and subsidies. Also to identify how it can be transformed to generate more positive impacts. Also identify the risks in terms of social and economic aspects, and also how we are going to to analyze the cost benefit results of these kind of reforms or changes, and also the idea of promote sustainable financing mechanisms. Since last year, the government of Colombia has been very active in opening the discussion about what are the financial mechanisms that the world needs to support to address the climate and biodiversity crisis. So it is important also that we have the financial sector involved, identifying how we can work together and implement financial mechanisms that are more in line with the objectives of biodiversity conservation and also climate change adaptation.
Thank you very much. And now finally over to you, David. Your thoughts, your advice, please.
My advice is that we need to act now. I mean, we are 6 years from the 2030 and the SDG achievement. And since 2015, let's be honest, we have not really moved in the right direction on some of the key questions we are discussing today. Food insecurity is at a very high level today. We have nearly 10% of the global population that is in chronic hunger. That's not a level we have seen since 2007, 2008. In 2015, we were breaking 4 of the planetary boundaries over 9. Today, we are at 6. And if we continue like this, not only by threatening climate and biodiversity, we threaten the future of global food security too. So really, we have to act now. Waiting more is not going to make problems disappear. It is going to make problems getting worse. And then even solving the problem will be much more costly politically and financially. So we need to engage right now with already reorienting some of the public expenditure we have. We have some countries that are already engaged in this, and I think we have much more information and tools. But last but not least, engaging the different stakeholders is very important. For example, we cannot antagonize farmers or opposing producers and consumers. We are literally all of us in this together. We all need to eat, but we also all need to be on a planet that is livable with biodiversity. And public expenditure is still a major way to shift incentives and to show the way to the private sector. At scale, most investment in agriculture are still done by the private sector. From the money we invested by the smallholders on his farm to the big effort done in R&D by large-scale companies. But how the public money is shifting incentive and orienting the system is still critical, and also the major source of trying to make the system fair and equitable for the low-income countries and the poor population also that should benefit from this on the long term, but clearly should not be sacrificed on the short term during the transition.
Super, thank you very much. So, panelists, colleagues, this has been a really thought-provoking conversation, and I think we've learned some very important things. Let me see if I can sum up some of the key points that were mentioned in today's discussion. The first, I think, is that we're only just scratching the surface when it comes to examining the nature of subsidies. We really need to step up efforts, both at the global and at the national level. I think that's number one. Number two, I think this is a point that you made, David, is that it's not always easy to identify the exact impact of each subsidy on nature, but we have to invest more in granular research and building up that evidence base in all countries, and that will help with the transparency, which is also critical in this space. I think that's number two. I think number three, a point that each of our panelists stressed time and again, is that to be successful, repurposing subsidies needs to include all different stakeholders impacted by the subsidy. And we do need to bring greater awareness amongst the public on the issue and how we bring the public on board. Now, it was Maria Teresa from Colombia who emphasized the importance of a cross-sectoral approach. And I think in different ways you all talked about the importance of working with agriculture sector, but also other sectors. And Rebecca and David, you both talked about the importance of how we steer public and use public investments as an important incentive to also nudge the private sector to invest in the correct way. So working with the financial sector and using public funds to steer the way private sector investments happen was also stressed. We've got a long way to go, clearly, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. We have a first cohort of countries like the UK, like Colombia, who are taking action. And organizations like FAO, like UNDP, are ready to support with a suite of tools on how to help make this happen. But we need clearly to expand the cohort of countries that are taking action to see more progress on CBD target 18. As David mentioned, there is very little time left. Some of these policy shifts take a long time to make, and time is ticking. There is an urgency to this action that is needed. So hopefully at UNEA, at the upcoming COP, at these other big global events, we can see a sort of more global alliance forming of countries and organizations that want to join forces and change the nature of subsidies. Let this be the first of many similar events to share progress, and let us hope that Target 18 can become an unexpected success story. It will require all our efforts. So I'd like to thank the speakers for joining us today in this discussion. If you want to find out more about this topic, please click on the link in the chat that's just been shared, and check out the guideline that the Minister was talking about, and also watch the video. It's a really amazing video for the nature of subsidies. Thank you all, and have a good day. Bye-bye.